Good evening. I wish to call the Lee County Board of Commissioners to order for this special joint meeting with the Lee County Board of Education on this Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. And we welcome everybody here and glad to see everybody.
I can't just say ditto, huh? Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody as well, and I'm now calling the meeting for the Board of Education to order.
So we will start out with introductions around the tables. I will start with myself and go this way, and then the chair and her board. So my name is Kirk Smith. I'm the board chairman for the Lee County Board of Commissioners. I've held this seat since December of 2020.
Taylor Vorbeck, District 4 County Commissioner, and have held the seat since 2022.
Samantha Martin, at large since December of this past year.
Mark Lovett, Lee County Commissioner at large, and I've been elected since 2020.
Cameron Sharp, at large, held this seat since 2016, and school board from 2008 to 2000.
Lisa Minter, County Manager.
Whitney Parrish, Lee County Attorney. Haley Hall, Clerk to the Board.
I'm Andy Cannon. I'm an outreach associate with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners.
Jonna Sharp, consultant with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners.
Susan Britt.
Oh, let's go start with your chair.
That's okay. You want Susan, go for it.
Although you're important.
I'm Sherry Lynn Womack, and I'm the chair of the Lee County Board of Education. Very proud of our public schools.
Alan Rummel, Lee County Board of Education since December 22.
Chris Gaster, Board of Education since December 22.
Cindy Ortiz, Board of Education since December 2024.
Megan Garner, Board of Education since December 2024.
Carla Hooker, Board of Education since December 2024.
Chris Dalsenbach, Superintendent. Steve Rawson, Board Attorney.
Justice Warren, the Assistant Legal Counsel with the North Carolina School Boards Association.
Susan Britt, Administrative Assistant to the Superintendent and Clerk to the Board of Education, Lee County Schools.
Thank you. I did get ahead of myself. I did not get my board to approve the agenda that's presented to them. Do I have a motion to approve? Motion's been made to approve the agenda for this evening. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Same here. I would accept a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is the school funding presentation, and we have from the School of Government, Kara Milazani. We bumped into each other on the way in here, and the last time I saw you was a long time ago.
Yes. All right. Good evening, everyone. While the presentation's coming up, I'm Kara Milazani with the School of Government, and what I've been asked to do tonight is just give a framework for navigating the local funding scheme that the statutes have set up for funding public schools and the relationship between counties and school boards related to school funding. And so that's our roadmap for tonight. I've got max an hour, so I'm going to try to cover a decent amount of material to set the stage, but please interrupt me at any time. I know there's some in this room that know much more than I do about the intricacies of what I'm about to talk about, and to the extent you think it's important to add some color or some depth, or you want me to, please interrupt, let me know that, or ask questions. And I'll make sure we stay on time if I have to kind of move things along, but please make this your own in terms of getting the information out of this that you'd like. All right, so let's start. Oop, I might not be in control of the clicker. Okay, should I tell you go?
No, it should.
Oh, it should work. Okay. I failed clicker. Let me see if, is it on? Oh, that might be it. Okay.
Technology.
No, I'm still failing clicker. while that's being fixed, so let me just say, to start with, you all know this already, but just to set the stage, school funding at the local level is unique. It's a unique thing for a variety of reasons. The first reason, and the slide will come up in just a second here, is the number of entities involved in public school governance. Right, so when we look at public school governance, and I know this slide is very hard to read, you have copies that if you want to follow along, but I'll summarize. We start with the Constitution. Our state constitution sets an educational mandate. And that's ultimately what we're all working towards, what everyone in the state is working towards, is meeting that educational mandate. We then, North Carolina is, again, somewhat unique relative to other states in that we have a more centralized school policymaking, more centralized policymaking and funding structure for our schools. That means that our state is more involved in setting educational policy than you see in many other states. And as we'll see in a minute, our state is more involved in funding public education than most other states in the country. And so who's involved at the state level? Well, we start with the state legislature, right? That through lawmaking, the state legislature sets educational policy, delegates certain authority and responsibilities, and appropriates the money. We also have a state board of education who sets educational policy, more the specifics of curriculum policy within the confines of the statute. We have the Department of Public Instruction, and we have the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. That functions more as an administrative body, helping to administer schools at the state level. And then at the local level, we, of course, have local school boards. They're separate legal entities from counties, but every county has at least one school system. Some counties have more than one. But they're separate legal entities from the county government, and they're charged with administering public education at the local level. That involves hiring, firing, and overseeing the personnel, and administering the curriculum in accordance with what's been set by the State Department of Education and the state legislature. And then we've got two other entities, if you're following along on the screen, county governments and municipal governments. County governments have been charged as a local funder of public education. And there's still a statute in the statutes that govern a lot of what schools do that sets out what the original policy scheme was from the state. And that statute, I think it's 115C407, somewhere around there. That statute says that it's the policy of the state of North Carolina that the counties will be responsible for the facilities, for school facilities. And it is the policy of the state of North Carolina that the state will be responsible for the operational funding. The reality, even the year that that statute came into existence, the reality is that it's been much messier in practice. And for lots and lots of years, the state has contributed some in different ways to the capital needs of schools. And it has almost always been the case that counties have been forced to provide some operational funding. So the amounts and the mechanisms have varied and have evolved over time, and we're going to focus on what the structure is today under the current statutory scheme. Municipalities entered more formally into this picture in 2018. And that's when the legislature first granted municipalities discretionary authority to fund public schools. Not just what I'm going to refer to as traditional public schools, local education agencies, local school administrative units, but also charter schools and other public schools. But that's optional. And we have some municipalities across the state who have started providing some supplemental funding to certain schools, to certain individual school buildings, certain classrooms, certain school units, but that's certainly not widespread. But they are now another player in this broader public school governance. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the money before we hone in on counties and school boards. These two things are both true, yet they sometimes are hard to reconcile. The majority of public school funding comes from the state. I've already said that. We're somewhat unique here in North Carolina in that way. We fund close to 2/3 in the aggregate, close to 2/3 of our public education is funded based on income tax or funded from income tax, sales tax, and lottery proceeds. In most other states, the majority of funding comes from property taxes, but we have a different funding scheme here. Having said that, in aggregate, 40 to 45% of our county's budgets go to fund K through 12 and community colleges. And so those two things are both true, right? So it is typically the largest county budget item is funding education, but still the majority of the funding to the schools is coming from the state. Those two things are both true. We do have the federal government involved, but not that much, right? The federal piece is more targeted outside of pandemic years. The federal piece is typically 7 to 11%, depending on whether child nutrition is factored in there. All right, so let's talk, though, about perhaps why we're here today, and that is the school and county relationship and who's responsible for what. And I'm an academic, and so we like to use, sort of fancy words to describe something that's a lot more complex. And so the fancy words that my colleagues have come up with to describe this relationship is one of shared governance. That kind of glosses over a lot of complexity in this relationship, and in particular, how our state legislature has assigned responsibilities between and amongst the two boards, the two entities. So at base, we have on the school board side, of course, setting local education policy, administering public education, and hiring, firing, and overseeing, employing all the personnel. And on the county side, providing funding for capital and operating needs, and in getting involved a little bit more in the capital side, having to approve certain school contracts. But this is, sort of at base, when we look at the framework, this is a delineation of responsibilities. But we know with the state sort of shadowing over this, the state being the big player, meaning both the state legislatures and the State Board of Education being a big player in here, this is not as neat in practice in terms of this delineation. And this is a perfect example of it. Some of you may be familiar with this statute, but I like to start these discussions here to illustrate the point, and to help us understand why there may be conflict, particularly between counties and school boards. So this is just a single statute, and this one has to do with the erection of school buildings. And if we start at the beginning of the statute, and you can read here, I've bolded some of the words here. It shall be the duty of local boards of education to provide classroom facilities. If we stop there, we'd at least feel fairly comfortable that we know whose responsibility it is to provide for classroom facilities. Again, we may not know how they're going to pay for it, but we'd feel fairly comfortable saying, okay, school boards, you have to provide the classroom facilities. But if we read on into that same statute, subsection B, again, we almost have a restatement. Shall be the duty of the local boards of education to make provisions by providing adequate school buildings equipped with suitable school furniture and apparatus. All right, we've got a little more detail, perhaps, about what it means to provide classroom facilities. But if we keep reading down, the school board has to submit those needs to the local tax levying authority, which is county government in this case. And then the boards of commissioners, and whenever we see the word shall, it means must, be given a reasonable time to provide the funds, which they, upon investigation, shall find to be necessary for providing the units with buildings suitably equipped. And then it's their duty to provide the funding for the same. So I use this as an exercise in a class I teach on school funding. Whose responsibility is it to determine what an adequate school classroom facility is? I've stared at this statute for 20 years. I'm not sure I could tell you, right, if we just looked at this statute, because of the way that it's worded, because of the way both entities, both school boards and counties, have been brought into the mix here just in this single statute. And we see language like this in this somewhat awkward perhaps nebulous division of responsibilities over and over in the statutes. And it can create issues in practice of figuring out who's responsible for what, who gets to make decisions related to what in this realm. And so we'll talk more, we'll come back to this, but we'll talk more about this and how it impacts some of the interpretations of the funding scheme. All right, so what are the challenges we're seeing? And I'm not an expert in Lee County or in Lee County schools, right? But I know from experience with all counties that I'm hearing the same challenges bubbling up right now. Some of these are perennial challenges in navigating schools. Some of them are more recent challenges that everybody's navigating, or almost everyone's navigating to some degree, right? A perennial issue is funding uncertainty. Given that the state is such a big player, not just in terms of setting educational policy, but also in providing the bulk of the funding, the fact that we almost never have a state budget by July 1st, but counties and school boards have to make budgeting and operational decisions at that time to be able to have a school year start in late August is really challenging. That is a perennially challenging issue. There have been years that I've been here that we don't have a state budget until into the fall. And so having to make decisions when such a big player in this is unknown is hard on everyone. More recently, we've got inflation. We have cost increases. Perhaps that's always the case, but it's been accelerated in recent years. Unfunded mandates, right? So the educational policy being set at the state level and unfunded mandates coming down on the school board. There's also unfunded mandates on the county side, not just related to education, but related to a whole host of other things that counties do. Attracting, retaining quality staff, right? We know this is just an issue across the board, but certainly we hear it with respect to teacher retention, principal retention, being able not just to get great people in, but to be able to keep them. And what does that take? Some more recent issues here, the end of COVID era supplemental funding is hitting everyone really hard. I just came from I live in Orange County, and Orange County schools are going through a really challenging period now of how to address the end of COVID era supplemental funding. They're not alone. Most schools and counties are dealing with this issue, and how do we resize for going forward with that federal funding going away. We also, and I'm not going to read down all the rest here, but an issue, and I'm not sure how much this is impacting Lee County, but an issue that we're seeing is the idea of the experimentation with what it means to have schools, right? New school models. That's not just charters, but public dollars going towards opportunity scholarships for private education, an increase in homeschooling coming out of the pandemic. There's more uncertainty around school numbers, not just for this year, next year, but what that's going to look like into the future, right? And that puts a new pressure on folks to try to navigate what the needs are short-term and long-term. All right, so these are just some of the challenges I'm seeing. There are others, but these are ones that are bubbling up, again, some perennially, some more recently. Okay, so now let's get into the funding scheme. So I'm first going to talk about state funding very briefly, again, because they're such a big player here. The way state funding works for education is funding comes down to schools in three ways for operational funding. We'll talk about capital in a minute. There are position allotments, dollar allotments, and categorical allotments. The way position allotments work is that, and this is going to be really hard to see, but this is, you have it in your notes. This is a snapshot from DPI, from Department of Public Instruction. The state legislature sets classroom size targets, right? So one teacher per every 18 students, one teacher for every 21 students, right? They set classroom size targets, and then you do a head count in the school system based, and at the class, right, at the grade level, do the head count. And that's how you determine how many positions will be allocated to the school based on that head count and that class size target. And so the school then can hire whoever is qualified, and the state will pay that person on the state salary schedule, whether that's a really senior level teacher or staff member or really junior level. The state will pay because it's a position allotment, not a dollar allotment. The dollar allotment, which is the second category of funding, is again done by head count. So it's per student, but this one's not based on classroom targets. This is just per student funding. We refer to it as ADM, average daily membership, and there's a calculation that goes into determining the average daily membership. Yeah, question or?
Ma'am, I have a board member with a question.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't mean to cut in and maybe
Nope.
you're gonna cover this, but like on the position allotments and even some of these dollar allotments, I think it's important. So you noted that they take the ADM across the entire district, but then when you break that ADM into individual schools, sometimes that count can be off. And I think we've discussed that amongst the boards, but just to point that out.
No, great point. I often joke, like, how do you have a .26 teacher, right? So when you do the math never comes out exactly equal to whole numbers. It's a great point, right? So it does create challenges in meeting even those grade level targets when the math doesn't come out as precisely. Great point. So for the dollar allotments, also done by this head count concept, right? But basically a per pupil, but it's $1 for certain things like school supplies, a certain amount per student allocated for school supplies or textbooks. And this is how teacher assistants and central admin personnel are funded as well. It is typical in the state budget that when the state allocates money, either by dollar allotment, that they put some pretty strict parameters on the schools, on the local school administrative units, about not being able to move money around. So that varies somewhat from year to year, but there's almost always some limit of flexibility in moving money around that's reflected in the state budget as these allotments come down. Categorical allotments, there's several of them, but this is the way the state has come up with to target certain money to special need populations. Sometimes it's special need because of the nature of the county or the school system. An example of that is this low wealth supplemental funding. We have a lot of low wealth counties in North Carolina and a very complex formula, and you've got a link to that formula if you're curious on the slides there. But a really complex formula for determining the low wealth calculation. But this is an example of,
I have a question.
yeah.
If you disagree with that formula, well, it's obvious that the formula is not correct for Lee County. What are the steps that a school board can take in order to get answers in reference to that formula? If you compare us with counties that surround us, there's obviously a disconnect somewhere. We brought it up to our House of Representatives, we brought it up to our Senate. So what is the next repercussions, or what can the board as a whole do to ensure that we get the appropriate amount?
That's a great question. So the premise of the question is that you think that the actual calculation doesn't match what the statute requires.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. I'm not sure there's a ready recourse. There's certainly not a ready recourse built into the law. I think the first place, I'm sure you've already done this, the first place would go to be to DPI, right? And sort of talk about how the calculation's being done and where you think there's a mismatch here, or where you don't understand how the numbers are spitting out relative to what you think. And then if you're not getting anywhere there, if DPI said, no, the formula is the formula, then to go talk to your legislators would be the next thing that I'd recommend. There isn't an automatic remedy for when you think the state's gotten the formula wrong.
Just from experience as a teacher in a high school in Durham County, exceptional children, is that funded through state and federal monies?
Yeah, so great question. So we have IDA money, we have certain money that's targeted, federal money that typically gets targeted to low-income population students. Some of which there may be an overlap with exceptional students, but it's not exactly the same population, right? And so you've got federal money that typically gets targeted. There's always special federal grants, there's always exceptions, but generally federal money is nutrition and it's targeted to these low wealth populations in low wealth districts. So that's where federal money typically is going. Exceptional students is a label that we put on that might describe students who have special needs. And there is a categorical formula from the state that comes down to provide supplemental funding to a school district to help meet those additional needs. But that's typically capped, and that's where we see these categorical formulas are typically capped. I think the latest cap for EC funding is at 13%. What that means is there may be, I'm just gonna pull numbers, 20% of your student body may have been identified as meeting the criteria under federal guidelines for meeting the criteria for special services. But the state's extra money that's going to go towards supporting those extra services is capped at 13% of the student body population.
And that's the same for English as a second language.
Yeah, so that's another categorical. I'd have to look up whether that one's capped or not at what level. Someone might know the cap on.
I think it's 13.
Is it also 13? Okay. That one, I work with less with that one. But yes, typically these categorical formulas are capped, particularly the ones targeted to student populations.
And if the cap is far below what actual population is, who makes up the difference?
So this is where it's tough. So we fund education in North Carolina largely equally, right? We do, the bulk of our funding is based on head count. That was a philosophical decision, right? A policy decision that was made a long time ago at the state level to fund students relatively equally in North Carolina. We fund students more equally than we see in most other states in terms of dollars per head count. The state has decided that there's enough need targeted to certain student populations to put some extra money towards that, but whether that covers the full cost of serving, it's hard to say, right? And so what does it mean? Because there's so much variation in what it actually costs to serve different populations of students, and it varies by year and it varies by student. So it is really hard to come up with a number that's going to meet all the needs of each individual student in any given year in a school system. And so we have very imperfect measures to do that. But I think the way North Carolina has chosen to fund education has been a policy decision for many years at the state level to really treat most students equally and then to target some additional funding based on certain characteristics. And there isn't a ready mechanism for someone to make up the difference. It's just the idea that a school system should meet the needs within the equal funding generally that's provided.
But we have a higher number of students, and the cap is cut off. So how would you explain that as being equal? Because you're asking us to do the exact same thing. In this, quite frankly, it validates your previous slide, unfunded mandates.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with unfunded mandates, then where do we go except for, and we don't want it to be a tax burden to our local community and our county, but the law clearly says what we must do in the school system. So what are the stipulations from that? Or is there a way of process to get that changed? Because I don't quite understand that concept at all. It's like if I have a room full of children to feed and you say, I'm willing to feed about 13% of them that are hungry. That does not, for me, I cannot understand that. Could you give me a little bit more insight on how that can be changed, or who would mandate that funding? Because you're saying, because you're up here, you're giving us a class in reference to who does the funding. So where does that come from? Does that come from the state? Does that come from the federal dollars? Does it come from the county? And if it's unfunded, then where does it come from?
Yeah, so I think it's an unfunded mandate. It doesn't necessarily come from anywhere. And that puts the organization that has to meet the demands of what the law requires without necessarily the dollars to meet it in a really tough situation. It's not that there is no answer that I can give you that'll be satisfactory, but other than to acknowledge that's the reality. It is exactly an unfunded mandate. When there's not enough dollars to cover what the demand, what the legal requirements are. Where the audience is to sort of make the argument that it's not enough really probably is with the General Assembly, and because that's where this funding is coming from, and that's who sets these target caps. All right, so let's talk about the flow of funds here, right? So folks understand schools are at the behest of other entities to get all of their funding. That's unusual for a public body to not have any mechanism really to raise their own revenue. And so when we think about flows of funds, we've got to consider how does the school actually get the cash, right? When you don't have your own mechanisms to raise the revenue, how are you actually getting the cash? And this is where we've had some changes this year on the state funding side. It used to be that we had actual ADM, actual head count numbers that were done the first couple months of school. And we would have a reconciliation process because the state's budget and the budget appropriations would have been based on estimated ADM from the year before, usually the spring before. Starting this school year, the state budget appropriations were made based on last year's head count. And what the new law says is that if this year's head count in the school, the ADM, ends up lower than what last year's was, then the school gets a year grace period. We're not going to cut their funding for a year, right? It used to be there was a reconciliation and the funding would get cut immediately, right, to reconcile estimate to actual. The schools that lose population get a year grace period. So the funding's not cut relative to what last year was, even if the ADM number dips, goes down. But for schools who have an increase in ADM relative to last year, the state has set aside a pot of money and hopes that that's enough money to cover school growth because it will distribute that money as needed to the schools that have an increase in ADM up until that money runs out. So it's at least under this new model possible, and I know some of the fast-growing school districts have been concerned that that money could run out and they could end up without funding, even that base funding, even that equal funding for their full ADM numbers. But it has worked to the advantage, this new formula, to counties who are experiencing a decline in student population, at least giving a full year to adjust, as opposed to sort of pulling that money out after 2 months. So this is new this year, the way the state is budgeting their ADM dollars. The funds are allocated monthly, and there's no state money left over at the end of the fiscal year, right? So you sort of use your state funding or you lose it. There's not state funding in fund balance because of the way the funding cash flow works. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to cut now to the local funding scheme. You've got slides that have some snapshots, again, from DPI about where ADM funding has been over the course of many years. Let's get down to the county level and local funding. So what are the sources of money at the local level, right? The primary source of county funding for schools is the primary source for county money for anything, and that's the property tax, right? Property taxes. I'm going to come to sales tax. So you might wonder why sales tax is not on the screen right yet. It'll come back when we talk about capital, because there's an earmark for sales tax for capital. It's possible counties are also using sales tax towards operating expenses, but primarily we look to the property tax. There's a minor source, fines, penalties, and forfeitures. We know municipalities can but don't have to be in the game. So far, that's a very minor source, if at all. The other one I want to point out is there is the opportunity for a voted supplemental school tax. This is the closest thing we have in North Carolina to schools having their own taxing authority. Doesn't quite work that way. It still requires counties and schools to work together. I've got a slide. If there is an interest in having a dedicated portion of the county's property tax go towards schools, which sometimes can provide cover for increasing the tax rate, that schools can petition to hold a voter referendum on having this voted supplemental school tax. And if the referendum is successful, then each year the school board gets to ask the county to levy that supplemental property tax up to the maximum rate approved by the voters, and it can be used for either operation or capital. It doesn't flow through the normal process that I'm going to talk about, so the counties don't have any control over how this supplemental tax money is spent. It's subject to whatever was set out in the voter referendum, either capital or operating or a mix. And then the county commissioners ultimately decide whether or not to levy the tax and at what rate up to the maximum requested by the school board. So it's close to the school board having their own taxing authority, but not quite, because the county commissioners are still involved. But we have a handful of counties, typically counties where there's more than one school district, where one of the school districts or a couple of the school districts will have a voted supplemental tax and the other will not, or some will not. That's the case in Orange County. But I know increasingly, counties more generally, even with a single school district, are looking at this option to really let the voters more directly weigh in on school funding and school funding levels. All right, you probably are very familiar with the process, just there are some target deadlines in the statutes related to the school board making its budgeting decisions and then sending them over to the county. Something to note that when the school board sends its budget request over to the county, the law requires it be the full budget request with all the estimates from the federal government, the state government incorporated. But we know, as we've already said, or as I've already said, that often those are estimates at that point. Certainly, they're almost always estimates at that point because we don't know exactly what the state or the federal government's going to do at that point in the year. One thing the statute does require the school board to provide is, and this is a fairly recent amendment to the statute, is some information on school performance. And so this, I can't remember when this came into the statutes, but it's been only a handful of years, where at the time that the school board submits the budget, there is a requirement to submit certain information about school performance, academic data, and identifying low-performing schools and the school's plan to remedy those issues. The other thing that the county commissioners in that same statute can always ask for when the budget request comes over is Board of County Commissioners, if they don't feel like they've gotten enough information to make budget appropriation decisions, can ask for any other financial information from the school. So that might be audits, it might be budget snapshots, it might be budget to actuals, it might be helping the county commissioners understand how school budgeting works. This is another area where I find there's lots of opportunities for information sharing. Counties are used to budgeting apples and schools budget oranges. Both fruit, right? But very different. And really hard sometimes for both sides to understand what the financials look like from the other side when they're not used to seeing the numbers that way. And so there can be an opportunity, even outside a budgeting process, to help educate both boards on how financials are on both sides, not just bottom line numbers, but how it works and how to read different financial statements, different budgeting frameworks. All right, so when the county commissioners make their budget appropriations, they do it typically to 2 funds, possibly to a 3rd fund. All money for operating expenses goes to the local current expense fund, also known as Fund 2, or the school's general fund. Capital funding goes to the capital outlay fund. And then typically, if there's any pre-K programs that the county is funding, those aren't mandated, but if they're pre-K programs, that's going to go to typically what we might refer to as Fund 8. There's limited county funding. The reason that goes there, that particular set of programs, is anything else that's in local current expense fund, the local school administrative unit, the school board has to share on a per pupil basis that money with the charter schools who educate the students that were already districted for the school. So if you have charter schools, even if they are outside the county, if a student who is districted for the county school goes to the charter school, then there's state funding, operational funding that follows that student, but also the county's local current expense funding follows that student. And other money that might be in this local current expense fund follows that student as well.
If I could just ask for my board's
Yes.
information, if I'm not mistaken, do we have 9 counties where we send money to for charter schools?
Yes, sir, I believe that's accurate. Yes, sir.
And so the only thing that does not get shared outside the county would be a voted supplemental tax. That could only be shared with charters in the county. That's due to some constitutional issues. All the other local current expense fund money will follow the students wherever they go, if they go to another public school, right? So charter being one example of that, the most common example. We'll come back and talk about capital funding in just a minute. But I often get the question of when county funding goes to that local current expense fund, how much can the county direct how county dollars are spent by the schools? And so there's been a scheme set up, and it borrows from a budgeting framework from back in the 1990s. That budgeting framework doesn't actually exist anymore, but the statutory requirement to comply with it still does. And so we go back to this old framework, which is this purpose and function code framework. And so, again, very hard to see if you're just looking at the slides on the screen, but these are the bolded instructional services, supporting services programs. Those are the purpose codes. And then the bulleted items underneath are the function codes. That is the greatest level of specificity that a county can direct its funding to. So for example, a county could say all of our local current expense funding to the school must be used for instructional services. But that doesn't mean must be used for new teachers, or must be used for teacher supplements, or must be used in Ms. Smith's third grade class. Those things are not allowed. So counties, even if they want, cannot direct county funding go to teacher supplements. They cannot direct county funding go to new positions. They can't direct county funding to go to certain supplies or to certain programs. All they can do is direct county funding at most. They don't have to do this at all, but at most, direct it to these purpose and function codes. And even then, there's statutory discretion for the school board to move money around 25% within these different categories, although the county board can limit it down to 10%. This is how you start to see how ridiculous this is, right? Where the statutes really sort of slice and dice authority very finely between the two boards. All right, what happens if a school board doesn't believe that a county has appropriately funded it for any given upcoming school year? We have a process in the statutes known as the dispute resolution process. This is a process that has gone through an overhaul, again, back to 2018. There were some major changes to this relationship that year, and this is one of them. Within 7 days of the county adopting the budget ordinance, if the school board believes that the county's appropriation for operational funding or capital funding is not sufficient, given all the other estimated funding the school believes it's going to get to support its educational mandate, then the school can initiate this process. And there are 3 steps. Step 1 is a joint meeting where a mediator will be identified and brought to that meeting, but this will just be a joint meeting of the boards. If the issue is not resolved, it goes to formal mediation with that mediator. And if the issue is not resolved then we trigger a statutory formula if the dispute is over operating. And so the statutory formula is effectively what is now setting our minimum funding guidelines for counties on the operational side. Because if this is the result, if you get all the way through a dispute, then this now is your target, right? This is your minimum, effective minimum funding formula, unless both boards agree to some other number. And so what is this? It looks at what you did last year, what counties funded last year, that schools actually spent out of the local current expense fund at a per pupil level based on ADM, and then it multiplies that times an inflationary factor and then times the ADM for the current fiscal year. So it's a per pupil maintenance of effort times inflation. That's the calculation is a bit complex. I have a blog post that gets into some of the nuances of it, but at base, that's what it is. When this came into effect, what it was intended to do is create some certainty, because both schools and counties were really struggling with the uncertainty of and the specter of potentially having to go to litigation to resolve differences, when we know litigation often takes 2 or 3 years to fully resolve. And so this was giving certainty, but certainty was there was trade-offs to get that certainty. You might acknowledge or recognize that this formula is completely divorced from school need in any given year, and it's completely divorced from county resources in any given year. It's the same formula whether we're in a recession or in a boom. It's the same formula whether you have sufficient money coming down from the state or whether that funding gets cut. The formula doesn't change, it just looks at what was done last year. I think perhaps an unintended consequence that we've seen in practice since 2018 is it has discouraged counties from making one-time investments in programs in school, because there's no exceptions to this, they just become part of the base. So there's no opportunity to say, let's try this for a year, and then legally scale it back. Of course, if both boards build trust and agree, you could do one-time funding, but ultimately it becomes part of this base and could result in this new statutory minimum formula. So there have been trade-offs. to having this formula in place on the operational side. But this is what we have now, and it is essentially a guide to the minimum funding requirements on the county side. All right, I'm running short on time, so let me just touch on capital, and then I'm happy to address other questions. All right, so I mentioned even though in the statutes themselves, the scheme has always been that counties fund the capital, right? That's been the function of county government, which is to fund the capital needs. But the state has always contributed in some way to the capital, through school bonds, through giving, lending some of its sales tax authority to schools and placing earmarks on that, having state corporate income tax go towards school construction, and more recently, having lottery dollars targeted there. These dollars come down to all schools through the Public School Building Capital Fund, and that's for at least 10 years. Every year, the state has allocated $100 million of lottery funds to that fund. That's been a static number for a long time, and it's allocated based on ADM amongst the 100 counties and then the school districts within those counties, and the county and the school jointly applied for that money to put towards school capital projects. More recently, the state, instead of increasing that sort of more general pot of money, the state has created this needs-based public school capital fund, and if you can see, there's $100 million in the public school capital fund, and there's 258 plus change million in the needs-based this past year. So this is where the legislative energy has been in the past several years, is putting money towards this needs base, and it's a more targeted funding fund. It's targeted to Tier 1 counties and other counties that meet certain hardship metrics, and it's meant to provide state funding towards school construction to offset the costs in counties that just simply cannot, according to the formulas, meet the needs. But if you're not captured within either a Tier 1 county or within those hardship criteria, then you're not eligible for this pot. Yeah.
If in fact your county had higher taxes, would that be a disqualifier for a needs-based grant?
If the county has higher taxes, no, I don't think that goes into, I don't know, I'd have to look at the financial hardship criteria. It's possible it's one criteria, but I don't think it is. I don't think a county effort counts against you in this particular formula.
Okay, because Lee County Schools has applied for needs-based grants in the past, and the conversation usually comes up, but your county they have a huge tax base, and you're saying it has nothing to do with it?
Well, so tax base versus tax rate, right? So tax base might be a proxy for them saying you're not a Tier 1 county, right? Your economic base. Tax rate is the number set by the county. That's different. So I don't know anything based on the tax rate, but the tax base is a proxy for saying, yep, the county is better off than average in terms of its economic well-being, and therefore doesn't qualify under the hardship criteria.
Okay, Dr. Dawson-Bott, do you have something you can add with that on our needs-based grant application?
No, just what you've mentioned is some of the feedback that we've received that based on the tax base that there were other counties with higher needs.
Okay, thank you.
So where do counties come in? Right, so again, when we look at local funding for capital, we're pulling from property taxes. Here we're also pulling now from the sales tax more directly, because a portion of the sales tax is earmarked legally to go to fund school construction or the debt service on school projects. And so there's 30% of a half-cent tax and 60% of another half-cent tax that is legally earmarked. Whether it's used in any given year or not, it retains that legal earmark and can only be used by the county towards school construction or the debt on school construction. So this contributes to the total pot of money put towards school construction, but it is part of what I said back in the 80s. It was part of what the state did to help counties. It's granting them the sales tax authority to begin with in order to help fund the schools. All right, so those projects are being funded through the Capital Outlay Fund. That's Fund 4. How much can a county specify how capital funding is spent? Well, counties have a little more discretion here. There's 3 categories of expenditures. If we're talking about Category 1, which is acquisition of real property or the construction or repairs of buildings, right? So the big dollar projects are Category 1 projects, then the county can appropriate money by project. Roof repair on Smith Street Elementary School. And the school has to use that money for that project. And if the school board doesn't need that money, can't do that project, they can't divert that money to any other expenditure without coming back to the county first and asking for permission. So that does give counties more control over how their capital dollars are spent if they're in Category 1. Category 2 and 3, those are just appropriations to the category. Category 2 is for furnishings and equipment. Category 3 is typically buses or other motor vehicles. And those are appropriations that can be made to the category, and then it's up to the school board to decide how to spend that money within the category. There are several statutes that specifically call out the county and have a requirement for capital funding. So again, the whole scheme that was originally set up was counties would only be in the capital business. And so we have a lot more statutory framework, underpinning the county's responsibility for capital. So a series of statutes that reference the county's responsibility for providing sufficient facilities and equipping those facilities to be able to, for the school board to carry out its educational mission. But none of these statutes speak to amount. So we go right back to the dispute resolution process when we have a disagreement over how much funding in any given year the county has to come up with. This time, though, if you get to step 3, there isn't a minimum funding formula. Instead, step 3 allows the school board, if there's a failed mediation, to initiate litigation. And then ultimately, it goes before a judge or a jury, and that judge or a jury is going to determine how much for that single fiscal year the county needed to provide to meet the capital needs of the school. And there are a lot of factors that the judge or the jury have to look at, including the school's request, the school's financial picture, all the other resources that are coming to the school, the county's resources, and the county's fiscal picture, right? So all of those go into factors in the judge or the jury's decision. The challenge here is the challenge that I mentioned before, in that the statutes require the trial court to act really quickly, to make decisions by end of August, early September, but the appeals process at least takes 2 years, if not more. And so, assuming that a judge or a jury were to determine there wasn't sufficient funding for capital in any given year, well, the remedy is 2 or 3 years down the road to order the county to give extra money that year that was needed 2 or 3 years in the past. And so I tend to describe this process a bit of a lose-lose, right? When you think about it from both sides, it's really challenging, this dispute process. If you get to litigation, it's really challenging for everybody involved. We've only seen, to my knowledge, one case out of Union County that was primarily about capital funding. Most of the cases in the past, before the statutory change, were over operational funding. And now that's what I think prompted that minimum formula. All right, last thing before I turn it over for final questions. What about making changes during the fiscal year? Once a county appropriates money to the school, there's a statute and it's in a weird place. It comes from 159-13. It's part of the county's fiscal control statutes. But that statute says that county cannot reduce its appropriation to the school during the fiscal year unless the school agrees or unless it's pursuant to a county-wide reduction, across-the-board reduction, because of some unexpected economic conditions. And that is true whether the school board spends all their appropriation in any given year or not. So this is not so much an issue on the operating side, because the county is required to provide 1/12 of its operational funding each month to the school. But on the capital side, there might be variation in how capital dollars get to the school. Sometimes counties pay for things directly. Sometimes the money goes to the school for the school to pay for something directly. Regardless, once that appropriation has been made, the county cannot reduce it. It retains that legal earmark, and it must be allocated to the school in the future fiscal year if it's not spent in the current fiscal year. On the school side, similarly, there's some constraints. Schools cannot move money between the capital outlay fund to and from any other fund unless it was something that was unforeseen and unforeseeable at budget time. That's a pretty high bar. and unless they get county commissioner permission. So I've sometimes heard from parties about, oh, we think they're moving money between funds. Unlikely, right? This statute requires that the money stay in the fund to which it was originally appropriated to. All right, so I've got some more data on charter schools and how they've come in, right? Charter schools are, as I mentioned, contributing to having to think about the financials for schools differently. Because students are leaving traditional public schools, and yet county money and state money is following those students. And schools are still having to maintain base structures, capital structures, and operational structures, and teachers and positions to support the remaining students. And so this is one of the current challenges that many schools and counties are facing, is how do we deal with fluctuating student populations? Whether they're going to charter schools, or home schools, or private schools, and then sometimes coming back mid-year, right? This is a challenge across the board. I've got a couple other slides here that get into some of the details on charter school funding, but I want to stop and see if there's any other questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions from the board? Commissioner Sharp? Commissioner Lovett?
None at this time, thank you.
Commissioner Martin?
None, thank you.
Commissioner Vorbeck?
Thank you for coming. Just a few
Your
questions on the
vote. What you got?
municipalities. It's a one-time, they're not under, so say the municipality gets into the school funding game, they're not held under the same type of rules and regulations. They could make a one-time tax, or not tax levying, they can do like a one-time fund to, say, a building.
Yes.
And it just be that, and they don't have to do it next year or anything like that. Like, they're kind of on that, they're not required to continue to put any funding they do from year to year, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the supplemental school tax on there, if that would be something that would be, palpable, there's a little bit of cycles on how that can be administered, correct? Like, it's gotta be on
The referendum?
Yes.
Yes. So you can only hold referendums in years in which, or at times when there is a general county election.
Okay.
So you'd have to time any referendum with the next general county, which means you typically, like in an odd number year, you typically don't have countywide general elections. They typically are in even numbered years. That's not always the case, but yeah, there is a bit of a timing issue there.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Sure.
I only had one actually. So with, when we talk about positional allotments, things like that, who pays for the positions, right? And I hate Commissioner Reeves isn't here because I know he asked this question a lot. But the question is, how many employees is the county responsible for? Based on statute, the answer to that is 0, right?
That's correct.
Yep.
The county is only responsible for meeting that minimum funding.
Yep.
And then it's up to the school board to decide wholly how to allocate that funding to positions or other expenses.
Sure. And then, so I suppose beyond that, so the statutory requirement is, statutory responsibility is 0, so it becomes essentially a county priority. You know, if the level of service is here and we want greater service, then the funding would have to be provided by the county to improve service. Is that fair?
Right, to the extent that more money means greater service, right?
Sure,
Like taking
yeah,
that for
right,
given,
yeah.
right? But right, that's where to the extent there's an opening for additional funding, it's at the local level.
Sure.
Right, yeah.
I think, I guess I do have one more. And I guess this also goes to those, you know, the positional allotments versus dollar allotments. So when we talk about classified versus certified staff is on a pay scale from the state where they receive, you know, a step increase for another year of service, whereas classified staff, that doesn't happen. Is there anything in statute that dictates who's responsible for providing a step increase?
There's not.
Okay.
There's not. So the state salary schedule is only for the certified staff.
Okay. So it's up to the school system to figure out how to make
Yes.
that happen? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
No question.
I had a question on the next slide.
Oh, sure.
If you're going to go through that,
Yes,
sorry.
happy.
I
It's
was
very,
afraid
very
you
tiny
were gonna
print.
skip that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the charter school support, could you elaborate on this portion that says not allowed from operational
Yeah.
and county?
So counties are not allowed to directly fund charter schools by statute. There's no,
Okay.
the way counties work, same as, unless there's a specific statute that allows a county to do something, they can't do it. And so in this case, there's no statutory authority for a county to directly fund a school. As you see from the bullet point above, and as we walk through, county money does go to charter schools, but it goes through the schools, right? So the county appropriation to the local current expense, the local current expense fund, that money follows the student to the charter school. So in that way, county money is going to the charter school for operational costs, but it's going through the schools through that allotment. Counties can't do it directly. As of last year, counties can directly fund certain capital needs of charter schools. So county commissioners could vote to provide funding for certain capital projects that related to, capital facilities for charter schools. That's discretionary, it's not mandated. But it opened the door for counties to provide funding just last year.
Thank you.
I have none.
Dr. Dockenbach, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Ma'am, thank you so much for providing the overview, and we really look forward to listening to Dare County. I would remind the school board that we go to a lot of legal classes and what the roles and responsibilities, but ultimately, when it comes to Lee County, we need to look out for the best of Lee County as well, and I look forward to Dare providing that. Oh, there he is. Welcome, sir.
Hey, how are you?
Okay.
I'm Bobby Allen. I'm the county manager in Dare County, out on the coast. It's interesting when I look around. I've been kind of where all of you are. I'm an attorney. I've represented the county before I became the county manager, so I've sat in these meetings in the attorney's role. I've been the county manager now for 17 years, so I've sat over here on the county side of these things, and then I'm a parent of 4 kids, and when I was practicing law, I sat out here advocating for the kids and for more money and trying to get the two boards together to try to, come up with what we thought was right. So I have some perspective that maybe helps, maybe doesn't, but I'll tell you, kind of what we do and how we do it in Dare County. Let's see. We have had over the years in my tenure a lot of meetings like you all are having tonight. And I'll use the word acrimony, that there was acrimony between our board and the school board. And it wasn't because anybody was bad or anybody was wrong. It was just that different responsibilities, different ways of looking at things created conflict. And the way it was resolved in the past was you had these meetings and you kind of slugged it out, and when you finished, everybody was mad and you came up with a number and you went on down the road, and then you didn't talk about it again until next year in March, and then you had another slug it out. And that didn't work. And in Dare County, we used a per pupil formula, and it didn't work. It treated all costs as if they were variable costs. And so if the population went up, then everything in the school system went up and the costs went up. And what we found was that over time, the funding level of the school was rising at this level, but the population was roughly flat. And then the CPI was kind of in the middle. And so we couldn't get a correlation between why were we funding the schools at the rate we were funding them when we didn't have a growth in population and the CPI wasn't growing as fast as the funding was. So something wasn't right, and we couldn't figure out what that was. We found that we were paying 28% a year increases when we were having 3% CPI increases. And that lack of correlation meant that could not be sustainable. We couldn't continue to fund at that level, keep taxes reasonable for our citizens, and give the schools what they need or what we thought they needed, and that didn't work. So we had to come up with a better way. When I finally question this. I asked the school board, what are your fixed costs? What does it cost you, if I add one more child to your school, what does it cost you for that child? They threw out the per pupil formula that we had always used, and I said, well, I don't think that's right. Let's bore down into your numbers and let's look at it. And so we did. Me and our finance director and the superintendent and their finance director sat down with those numbers and went through those. And what we found was that the majority, 90-some% of the cost of operating the schools are fixed. It doesn't cost you another dollar to heat that school if you put 50 more kids in it. It doesn't cost any more to run a school bus with 20 kids than it does to run a school bus with 60 kids. And as we went through all those numbers, we found that those costs were fixed, and there was a very, very small amount that was based on population. The county didn't pay for the teachers, so to the extent that population required teacher growth, that was funded by the state. To the extent that you had other variable costs, those were paper, pencils, insignificant in $25 or $30 million that we were given to the school board each year for their operations. So we sat down and said, okay, well, how do we keep you funded? And we looked at what are those fixed costs? And we did this in 2015, and rather than get into a big fight or a debate about whether the schools were adequately funded or not adequately funded, we assumed that in 2015, the schools were adequately funded, and that is the base for future funding. And that was arbitrary, but it was a way to do that. All this stuff that I'm telling you was done with the four of us, the superintendent, the finance director from the schools, me, and our finance director. The four of us sat down and we worked through all of these things that I'm telling you. In that year, there was a CPI of about 1.3%. We found, I said before, that the local share of that was about 94% of that. And so what happened was we said, what if we took that 2015 base, and next year when we fund you, we'll give you that base, and that base is what it actually called. We went through, what did you actually write checks for in the previous year to fund schools, and to that total, we added the CPI, and that was the operational cost, one part, the fixed cost portion of the school board's budget for the following year. The second part of the plan was, okay, well, what were the variable costs? And those were very small. You can see in 2015, that was less than $300 a kid. Again, almost everything in the school system was a fixed cost. And now, mind you, I'm not talking about capital costs now. These are just operational costs. And so we took those variable costs and we did the same thing. We said, okay, what did you actually write checks for last year in variable costs? And we added those up and we added the CPI to that. So now we've got exactly what the school spent last year, inflated by whatever the cost of all those things are that go up. And that goes into both the variable costs and the fixed costs for the school system for the next year. The third component of this are the salary costs. One of you asked a moment ago about funding additional teachers at the state. We have a significant number of those. Our geography is really strange. I don't know if any of you have been to the Outer Banks, but we're about 3 miles wide and about 100 miles long. And so we have schools down in Hatteras that if we were in a square county, we would not have those schools. And so we wound up having to fund principals and teachers and things with the county that don't count in the school system because of the way we have to spread our schools out. And so we fund a number of those positions. And so what we did in the third component of the operation cost was we went through and we said, take those salary costs, whatever the state does to the state employed teachers, we'll do that for the county employees teachers so that we keep all the teachers on the same pay grade. So if the state gives a 5% raise, then all the county paid teachers get a 5% raise. If the cost of benefits goes up, we pay the cost of the benefits go up. Whatever the costs are for our teachers, we match the state so it keeps the school board whole as they go forward with those expenses. So now, on the operational side, we've got the three main things. We've got the fixed cost covered at what it actually costs the school, plus a CPI. We've got the variable cost covered at what it actually costs the school, plus a CPI for the coming year. And we've got the salary costs covered for the costs that we cover, and we match the state on that. With those things said, then the question becomes, well, what if you need to do something beyond the base? You know, resource officers. We fund resource officers. They're not in this formula because we did this after the formula came out. We recognize a need for resource officers. They're paid for out of the county budget. Those dollars don't even go to the schools at all. School nurses, they're run through our health department. They're not paid through the school either. We fund those. We have some social workers that we put in after COVID to try to help with some of the mental health needs. We fund those things outside of that as well. We had a need for teacher supplements. Dare County's got a super high cost of living. We were struggling to hire teachers, and so we added dollars to their supplements to try to help pay to get teachers in Dare County. Those are outside of the calculations in the formula. Once they're in, though, they become a part of the formula for the next year, and those are escalated based on the CPI. And so where the school has needs, and those needs are recognized, then the county tries to fund those needs in the operation budget, and then as we do that, we carry that forward. Once the four of us got our plan together, we called in the chairman of each board and said, guys, we've been working on this for a while. Here's what we think. And here's a way to avoid this fight that we've been having every year for the last 15 years. Here's a way we can fund this, a way we can give each board some certainty. We can give each board the ability to plan. You know what's coming. And then if we have to have a discussion, it's only out on the margins. It's, are we going to fund those resource officers? Are we going to fund this other thing, which is a much different conversation than trying to go through the whole budget and argue about what the people who, the Board of Commissioners who aren't elected to make education decisions do, but the Board of Education is not elected to make fiscal decisions, and so you have the inherent conflict, and that's what we were trying to get rid of. And so we brought them in, and when we convinced the chairmen that this made sense, we asked them to bring in 2 other members of their respective boards. That's 3. We were doing this because these weren't formal committees. We wanted to have candid conversations. This didn't rise to the level of a public meeting that we had to notice because we didn't have majorities present. It wasn't a board appointed by anybody. It was the staff asking these people to come in and meet with us to hear our plan. So now we have 3 from each board on there, plus the 2 staff members, hence the name 5 on 5 is what we called it since then. And when we got through and went through all that with them and had a number of meetings to look at that, to go through all the what ifs, how are we going to do this, what are we going to do that, to see if this would really work, we got buy-in from those 3 board members on each board. And at that point, we said, okay, let's now present this to our respective boards as a whole. And so each of us went to our respective boards as a whole. We had the 3 board members that had already been involved with us, and between the 5 of us on the county side and the 5 on the school side, went through and talked through this with the rest of our boards and got agreement to proceed and see how this worked and work forward through this plan going forward. The details, as I said before, the funding is always based on the previous year's actual, then increased by the CPI. It can fluctuate because if you don't spend all the money you had, then next year you're coming off a smaller base, but you're going to put the CPI to it. The result has been that the school board has gotten an increase in money every year. There's not been a year where they were flat or didn't get some increase, and so that's worked well for them. You know, I said before, anything that's not in the CPI, the extra stuff has to be approved by the board, and then we have those conversations. It's been in place since the fiscal year 2016, and it has worked well. We've covered all the operating costs. We haven't had a fight or an argument or really a in-depth discussion about school funding since then, other than some capital things, and I'll talk about capital in just a minute. But on the operating side, it has been fine. It's worked well. It's flattened that curve I was talking about before out to where it makes sense now. It sort of follows the inflation with whatever escalators we put in for extra stuff. And it has significantly improved the relations between the boards. I'm running a little late getting here today because we had a 5-on-5 meeting today at 1 o'clock, fortuitously or not, to talk about, really not even to talk about budget. We were talking about academic achievement and what the goals of the school board were, where we were in that process, what needs to be done, where's our role, what's their role, how's what we're doing working, all those kind of things. That was what it was about. Because we don't really have to have a discussion about funding. They know what they're going to get right today. They haven't even presented what they want to us yet. They haven't got their budget, but they know what we're going to do. And absent something that's different or special or something that's not in the base that they need, we won't have that discussion, other than they'll show up and say, present us with their request, and it'll be what our formula says it'll be, because the staff has already worked through all that and shared it with the board, and everybody knows what it is. What that has required of us at the commissioner level is we use that formula, the school funding comes off the top, and then we look at our revenues and say, okay, now what are we going to do with everything else? The only time we wouldn't do that is if we had another 2007 situation where everything went in the tank, then all bets are off and everybody has to sort of share in the pain, and we'll figure that out. But we haven't had that happen, and so since we've had this in place. Since we did that in 2016, the 5-on-5 committee was established formally. Now it's an appointed committee. It is a public meeting. We do notice it. The public's invited to come to those meetings. Again, it has the 3 commissioners and the 2 staffs there. We meet multiple times a year. Like I said, today we met. It wasn't about budget. It was about academic achievement. We meet about other things, and we meet about once a quarter just to communicate so that the Board of Education knows where we are fiscally and knows what to expect coming forward, and so that we know from the Board of Education what their problems are and what their expectations are, so that when we get to March and April and May and we're working on budgets, we already have some idea because we've been having conversations all year long. We didn't wait till March to start talking. For us, the benefits have been that, again, you know what you're going to get. It has created the ability to plan. There's no last-minute surprises, and you can do the things that you need to do. We don't have an MOA. Somebody asked me, do we have a written agreement that says all this? We do not. The PowerPoint you have in front of you comes from this outline that we prepared, or I prepared, when we put all this in place. They have it in their file. We have it in our file. We've agreed that we're going to work off of this. We didn't write it down because the more you write, the more details that you got to have, and it sort of takes away the ability to discuss, and it takes away the ability to be flexible, but it gives us a place that we're all starting from, and it gives us a good number that we can all count on. And like I say, it has worked extremely well in Dare County. So now we go back and say, well, what do we do with capital? So before we put this in place, the school board had a capital plan, and the county had their capital plan, and the school board would come in and say, here's our capital plan, and they had done it with their team and their staff, and they had done it with no knowledge of what the county's capital improvement plan was at all. And so now you got these two competing capital improvement plans. You may have multi-million-dollar projects in each plan that happen to land on the same year, and you can't reconcile the dollars to make all that work. And so that wasn't workable for us either. So on the capital request, those are the things that are $50,000 or more. There are two parts of that, the way we look at it. There are the lottery money capital things, and then there are the things that will be paid for out of the county funds. On the lottery money side, if we're going to use lottery money to do it, then the school board can say what they need, they can set the priority for what they need, and if the lottery money will pay for it, the board will approve it and we'll move on. It's not our place to set the priorities for the school. It's the school board's place. They were elected to set those priorities, and because it's the lottery money, it doesn't impact other funding in the county. And so when we're talking about that, we leave it to the school board to do what they think is best with that money. If it's county funds, then we have a different situation, because that is then competing with county needs. And in the county funded things, we sit down and we have merged, we have one capital improvement plan, and that is the county capital improvement plan. And it covers schools and the county things that need to be done. And so if we've got a problem or we got a conflict, then we have to sit down and work that priority out. You know, if the school needs a classroom and we've got kids that are in closets or whatever, then we recognize that's going to come ahead of us building a new baseball field or something. And so we rearranged our capital plan to cover that. On the other hand, if we have an item that we have to have, a new jail or a whatever, and they need a new field house for the football field, then that football field house is going to get put further down on the priority list. So we sit down and we talk about that. We talk about the available funding. We have a capital improvement fund. We have dedicated revenues that we put in that fund, and so we have a finite amount of money that we do. We have a 5-year capital plan, and so if you need something in 2027 and there's not room in 2027, we either got to take something out of 2027 to get it in, or we got to move you out 5 years to the back end of the plan when there's more money. And we have to sort that out with the school. Can it wait? Where does it go? And all that. And so we do have conversations about not whether the school needs it or whether the school wants it, but when can it be done, and where does it fit in the overall capital requirements of the whole county, and how can we do that in a fiscally responsible way to meet the school needs, but also meet the needs of the county, understanding that, you know, the county commissioners, if they have to raise taxes to deal with any of these issues, they're the ones that are going to take. Nobody's going to come to the school board and say, you raised my taxes and I'm going to vote you out because you're not raising their taxes. So the political side of it for the Board of Commissioners are, they've got to be careful how far they can go, how much revenue they can create. And so we have that model. That model is done in a spreadsheet. It is a formula model. The Board of Education has the model. They can manipulate it. They have the same ability to plug in their dollars in certain years and certain things and see how that works with the resources that are available. We have it too. For the most part, what happens is that the finance director, our two finance directors, and me and the superintendent have so far at least been able to make all that stuff work, and if we can get satisfied with it, then generally our boards are satisfied with it, and so we haven't had a lot of problems there. We're building the new early college now, that we're getting ready to start on that in May. That's about a $25 million building that we're putting on our community college campus. We had a ton of debate on that. It was a big deal in the community. You had a bunch of public comment for and against. But at the end of the day, it's being paid for out of lottery money, and our board said, you know, there's some public that wants this, there's some that does not. Board of Education, if you want it, we can fund it out of the lottery fund, and we'll support you on it, but it's your choice to decide if it comes this year or in '27 or whenever it is, and they chose this year, and we support them and we go on because it's in the lottery money. There's some things that are coming up that aren't in the lottery money, and they aren't going to make this year's budget, but we've talked to them. They don't need it before '28. We can make it work in '28, so, you know, we're working those things together. So that's how we do that. And then sort of the last thing is the capital outlay. The capital outlay, we simply increase the capital outlay funding to the school system by 5% every year. And they get that, and then they get to prioritize the capital outlay however they want to. We just give them those funds, and then we don't dive into how they're using them, other than they have to use them for the capital outlay. There is no default prioritization. We don't get first dibs at the money, or the school board doesn't get first dibs at the money. Again, we try to do it need-based. Everybody in our room, and I'm sure everybody in this room, has the same goal in mind, to do the best they can do for the kids, to do it efficiently, to do it in the best way they can do it, to make it economical to the taxpayers. And so if everybody's trying to do that, then we haven't had much difficulty once we started using the formula and doing it the way I've just described, making all this stuff fit. So with that said, again, our financial stability has been much better. Our planning capabilities have been better. The collaboration between the boards has been much better. And we've been able to meet our education needs in a way that's sustainable, that we can plan for, and that's fair and efficient for our taxpayers. And so with that said, that's a brief synopsis of how we got to where we were to prevent the back and forth between the two boards, to make sure everybody's adequately funded. And I'm glad to answer any questions that anyone has.
Just clarification, how do you pronounce your last name again, please?
Alton.
Alton? Okay, thank you. Anyone on the board going with Commissioner Sharp, questions for Mr. Alton?
Not a question, just a statement. You make it sound easy. Like with everything, or at least from my perspective, like with everything, the key to solving problems is communicating. And if you're not talking and you're not thinking together, or you're not trying to figure it out together, and you're trying to wait till March or April to start having the conversations that, and from our perspective, should have been going on all year, then it's hard. But if you're talking and understanding, and you have a baseline plan and things that you're working from where everybody has expectations, then all of a sudden it becomes easy. And it, for the last 10 years, it has been easy for us, for sure. Thank you.
Commissioner Lovick.
Look, appreciate that.
Commissioner Martin.
I'm going to echo Commissioner Sharp's statement. It sounded hopeful and easy, and need something along that line. How does the transition work for you with the members on the 5-on-5 when they're, with the changes in composition?
We started this, and we had, I think our chairman we had a mostly Democrat board back then. It's all Republican now. So we've gone through the party structure, and we've had the whole board. There's only one member of our 7 members Board of Commissioners that was on the board when we started, and there's no one at the Board of Education, not the finance director, and not any members of their board. And so we have talked about it a lot, and it's been accepted because I call it the battle of the PowerPoints. Up until then, the school board would have all of our meetings are televised. I don't know if yours are, but ours are televised. And the school board would have their televised meeting, and they would have their PowerPoint presentation about why they need all this money and all this stuff, and how we're not adequately funding them. And then
at our next board meeting, we'd have our PowerPoint showing all the money that we've given them and where it's gone and why, and the big discrepancy. And we weren't doing anything except telling the public that we're not talking, we're not understanding each other, and then who's right, who's wrong, nobody knows. And so that wasn't getting us anywhere. And from a staff perspective, it is really frustrating trying to sort through that, because you gotta kind of stand back and let the political people fight it out. And that wasn't getting anywhere either. So we as a staff got together and said, what can we do to figure this out? And if we thought we could figure it out, and we were hoping that we could then sell it to our elected folks, and we were able to do that.
Thank you for the presentation and for your generosity in travel and time.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Vorbeck.
I don't have any questions, but thank you so much. This is very insightful and really appreciate you can see the passion behind it. And I think it's a good, it was very good hearing from you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I've got all kinds of questions.
I'm not,
You got questions?
I have some points to make. I just wanted to thank you for coming all the way up from Dare County. I've been to Dare County many times. Just was curious, what is your student population?
We're under 6,000.
Under 6,000. I noticed that your population for residents is half of our population. I noticed your tax rate is right at 40 cents.
About to go to 26 cents.
Okay, don't rub it in. We're at 65. Your taxable property valuation, so apparently you have very valuable property because you're number one in the state for
Correct.
per capita valuation on property tax. So if you want to send some of those people inland, the next hurricane that comes in, we'll put them up.
But understand, we have, our population is 37,000. You think,
Yes.
my gosh. But for 4 or 5 months, 6 months out of the year, I got 350,000. And
Sales
so
tax.
everything that we do is gauged. I mean, our sheriff's department, our fire department, our EMS, all the things that we do, all the services we provide, our sanitation, our water, is all geared to 350,000. That's closer to something like Wilmington.
Wow.
For our
That makes sense.
seasonal population. And so, and yeah, we do have a large tax base, but it requires a large tax base to fund all that other stuff.
I want to say thank you.
Sure.
I have no question.
I echo the,
Our finance, he's in charge of our finance committee.
Sure.
So we're gonna do some as well.
no, I just echo the thanks for coming, and, I mean, the only thing I had to say is you had me sold when you had a meeting today to talk about educating kids instead of all the others. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming and being here and sharing your experiences. It's been, I think, helpful. I hope so.
Good.
Thank you.
I concur with those over there. It made it sound easy. But there's a lot to glean off of this that you shared this evening. So I'll, thank you for coming and sharing this, and hopefully we can incorporate a little bit of this and try to make a path forward. So thank you.
Saheem, I appreciate you coming. I know our chair has been really speaking about this to us at our meetings and everything. It is very, like I said, it sounds easy. I would love for us to have that, to have the meetings and the, just to be able to talk about things in general as long, as well as all the good stuff, as well as the stuff that you can't always agree on, but hopefully come to some kind of, mutual understanding. So thank you so much.
I'll echo that as well. Thank you. Your findings around fixed cost and variable cost I found very interesting. I don't know if there's more information you can share there, but hopefully we can do something similar.
I think you'll be surprised. I'll tell you that when I said that, the superintendent and the school finance director looked at me like I had 3 eyes, and
Yeah.
I said, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I can be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. I said, but let's just look at it, and if I'm wrong, we'll come up with something else. And a couple weeks later, they came back and said, "Dog, we didn't think that, but that's how it came in." It wasn't we made the revelation that happened. It's they made the because they went through their numbers and found it to be true, not us, going back and trying to prove them wrong. So
Yeah, it's definitely a new pivot on how we look at it, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I also want to say I thank you for coming.
Sure.
I enjoyed your presentation. I think it was great. And I think that if all of us can communicate with one another and compromise, that things will get better.
Well, the only other thing I'll tell you is, from our perspective, and I'll be the first to tell you, this may not be the way for everybody. I mean, this is the way for Dare County, and it's worked well for us. But it is, the need to compromise and the need to give and take is gone. We know what we're going to spend next year on schools. They know what they're going to get next year on schools. And so the only thing that we have to talk about is there something that's not built into these operational costs or these capital costs that we haven't talked about that we need to talk about. And if there is, then we'll talk about it. If there's not, then, because we don't build a lot of schools. I mean, we're not growing. Raleigh grows by our whole school system every year. So we're not building a lot of schools. And so we don't have to have those kinds of debates. But for the most part, for the day-to-day, the operational costs, paying the teachers' costs, doing the things that schools do every day, there's no real discussion about that because everybody knows. And so it allows us to have communication and allows us to have these meetings because we don't need to talk about the money. We can talk about what's really important and the educational things, and because we've got the money behind us, and we've already done that.
Sir, I have a few questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
How often do you meet?
We meet about every quarter unless some issue comes up.
What were your largest challenges that you face trying to get the two boards to come together and build a collaborative team?
The first was getting the superintendent and the finance director to play along with me because they thought I was absurd, and I might have been. That was the first challenge because it had never been looked at that way. It had never been done that way before, and it had been done the other way for forever, for 30 years. And then once they got bought in, and once we understood, and once we went back and we proofed this. We went and proofed this against other years of how the school was financed in previous years, what their cost was. What we were trying to do is say, if this is right, if we had used this we started in 2016, what if we applied this in 2013? What would have happened? And so we went back and pulled 2013 out and applied this to 2013 to see what impact it would have had, and it would not have negatively impacted school. And so we proofed it on other years that had already passed to be sure that we weren't missing something or that this wasn't a crazy idea. And what we found was that, yeah, it would have met the school needs in those previous years as well.
Okay, who determines the agenda or the topics for discussion on your 5 and 5 teams when they come together? Because I noticed in the paperwork, I had the privilege of attending the class. And it was interesting that you had your chair of the Board of Education and the chair of the county commissioners there, pretty much, as you said, selling the program. But in that discussion topic, so when those come together, I know that you have discussed other things other than just financial. For instance, a community can come together and talk about teacher retention. If it's a housing issue, is it something that the county can help with? What other topics has the 5 and 5 addressed in Dare County?
First question was who sets the agenda? Whoever calls the meeting, the school board can say, hey, we need to have a 5-on-5 to talk about this. We just had one. We've had more than a quarter. We've had 2 or 3 since the first of the year because we were asked to fund school lunches, to fully fund all school lunches. And so the school board asked to have a 5-on-5 to have a discussion about what it would cost, what the educational benefits were to fund 100% of the school lunches, and what the negative impacts were not doing that. And so we had a discussion about that at the request of the school board. Today we had the meeting I was telling you about earlier at the request of
our side of the Board of Commissioners, one of our board members is really interested in the achievement levels, and he's really concerned about how slowly we're coming back from COVID and some of those kinds of things. And so he wanted to sit back and get educated on how all that was working, again, what the problems were. So he asked to have it for that. And so depending on what the issue is, we had the school board ask us last year about increasing teacher supplements. And so they asked to have a meeting, and we went through all the ramifications of that at that meeting. And so again, it just depends on what the issue is and who calls it.
And the key successes from having the 5 to 5, and I believe that was presented, maybe not all of them here, but in our class, it talked about, not only did you guys go into the staff retention and recruitment, you also did something separate in reference with the community colleges, the school-based mental health, the facilities improvement, the effects on student achievement.
Yep.
So that would help with the student achievement. So that being said, that's why I was very passionate about, at least you could come in here. I truly believe that if we got 3 people, regardless, I don't like you calling it sides and sides. I mean, if we've got 3 on the commissioners and 3 on the school board who are truly passionate about the children in Lee County and also want to benefit the entire community, I'm not sure what else we would need in order to have a successful 5 to 5 committee meeting.
If you're going to do something like this,
Yes, sir.
then you would need your 2 staffs to run numbers, to go back and truth it like I was telling you with previous years, and see what that means to you all and how that would work for you all going forward. And if your staff, 2 staffs believe that can work, then I think getting your boards online probably wouldn't be difficult.
And the other thing is they mentioned something about, physical responsibility as well. You know how we have 2 separate budgets, as you said. And I love the idea of the way you do, there's one capital fund for the whole county that you kind of look at that big picture. But how did those finance 2 entities come together on a quarterly basis, or decide, or to assume that they're doing exactly what they expected to do and had told the public they were going to do with the budget?
We agreed when we did this, because of the timing of when you have to do your budget, that we would do our look back for the previous 12 months. It's not really the previous 12 months of the fiscal year. We did it in February. So we take 12 months, the previous 12 months from February, we add up what were the costs that the school actually spent in those 12 months, and then we add those CPIs to it. And the school board and the finance director and our finance director get together and look at the school's numbers, and they agree. And I mean, there was emails back and forth today reconciling the numbers. And so they wait, you forgot this, or this percentage wasn't right here. And so they did all that, started on that today, reconciling those numbers, and so that we can then calculate what we know what CPI we're using, and we know what that is, and we can then calculate under our funding formula what the funding will be for the school for next year.
Okay, and one final thing is the person who presented before you as well did a pyramid. And in the pyramid, she talked about all the current challenges that we have. And I think some of this 5 to 5 would cover some of those challenges. Funding uncertainty, that was the top one that she provided to us. The cost increases and unfunded mandates. So I think if there's a possibility with your 5 to 5, do they actually come together and discuss ways that they can work together to accomplish the same mission by being able to take care of meeting the unfunded mandates?
So, the right or wrong, and we haven't had many, but where if the state or the feds determine that a program isn't going to be funded anymore, then our position has been that they've determined that that wasn't important. They're not going to fund it, and we're not going to backfill it. That, those things, if they're important to the state, then the state will fund them. If they're not, part of that is for that. The other part of it is if we ever do backfill it, then
from that point on, it's going to be the county's responsibility forever. It'll never get back to where the state or the feds fund it. So we haven't been asked to backfill it, nor have we backfilled those kinds of things. If those programs go away, then they go away, and we use our money to do something else.
Again, thank you for the long drive and for your staff, and particularly your chairman of the Board of Education and your chairman of the county commissioners, who provided their time as well.
All right. Glad to help if anybody has questions. And let us know.
I have another question.
Sure.
Just regarding the naval bombing range, how much money do you get from the federal government to offset your tax base?
Well, it's not just the naval bombing. Almost 90% of Dare County is owned by the state or federal
And the
government.
federal
So there's
government,
only less than 10% of privately owned land in the whole county. We get a stipend, it's called a payment in lieu. It's not a lot, it's a couple $100,000 a year, so it's not a lot of money, but that's what we get, payment in lieu of taxes.
Wow. And you touched upon some capital projects that you're dealing with. We're dealing with a new jail. Lee Early College is in trailers, and they're demanding a building. And we just lost our storage facility. They're telling us that we're getting evicted, so we're going to have a facility that we're going to have to work on as far as our capital needs. I know the school board has a desire for a new auditorium and a school bus garage. We're just having all sorts of fun. I would like to know from my board, do we have a consensus to direct the manager and I apologize, Angelina, our interim finance director to coordinate with the superintendent and their finance director?
Chairman Smith, can I ask that we also include our budget and management analyst in that from our side to relieve some of the pressure on the interim finance director?
Please, I mean,
Thank you.
Motion to approve.
motion to approve. We have a motion to approve directing the manager, our interim budget manager, and finance.
He's not interim, he's our budget and finance analyst.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We've directed our
On the agenda.
manager move forward.
All right, does the board anyone else have any questions or concerns? I know that's not on we did not discuss the bus garage and the auditorium.
No, I just brought it up. I mean, we're going to do that next year. But I do want to say, Mr. Otten, please, thank you. Please drive safely, wear your seatbelt, and no speeding home.
Dare County.
Next item on the agenda is bus garage and Southern Lee High School auditorium. Or do we need a break?
Yeah.
Let's take 10 minutes. Can you set up the client timer, Marshall? 10 minutes. 10-minute break. I'm gonna go ahead.
Worship 'cause I'm so lonely. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Some say it's a sign of weakness for a man to beg. Then weak I'd rather be, if it means having you to keep. 'Cause lately I've been losing sleep. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Empty nights echo your name. Oh, sometimes I wonder, will I ever be the same? Oh yeah, when you see me smiling, you know things have gotten worse. Any smile you might see has all been rehearsed. Darling, I can't go on without you. This emptiness won't let me live without you. This loneliness inside me, darling, makes me feel half alive. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving, got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving. I know you wanna leave me, but I refuse to let you go. If I have to beg, plead for your sympathy, I don't mind, 'cause you mean that much to me. Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it. Please don't leave me, girl. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. Now I heard a crying man is half a man with no sense of pride. But if I have to cry to keep you, I don't mind weeping if it'll keep you by my side. Ain't too proud to beg, sweet darling, please don't leave me, girl. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. If I have to sleep on your doorstep all night and day, just to keep you from walking away, let your friends laugh, even this I can stand, 'cause I wanna keep you any way I can. Ain't too proud to beg, sweet darling, please don't leave me, girl. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. Now I've got a love so deep in the pit of my heart, and each day it grows more and more. I'm not ashamed to come and plead to you, baby. If pleading keeps you from walking out that door, ain't too proud to beg, you know it. Please don't leave me, girl. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. Baby, baby, I did you wrong. My heart went out to play, but in the game I lost you. What a price to pay.
If we can get back to our agenda, we had our 10-minute break. I appreciate all the side conversations. Do we have slides on item 4, handouts, slides? Item 5,
Mr. Chair, can I take the floor when you get started?
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. He has now given me the floor. I would like to direct the staff of Lee County Schools to immediately research and start implementing certain aspects of the 5 to 5 to be discussed later. And during that time, I would also like to provide one of the board members an opportunity. With the 5 to 5, you can discuss some of the things that we currently have on our agenda. Mr. Rummel? It doesn't matter. Which one? Yeah, the audit, one of the bus garage is something that we were discussing previously before, and I think basically they just want to know the status of the bus garage.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, we don't have formal presentation on this. I guess, so given the 5-on-5 presentation we just received and talking about how collaboration was greatly improved with that, I think the bus garage discussion, to my understanding, kind of left at, I suppose, a no interest in the joint venture, if that's a fair statement. So I guess the question was, is the intent for us to proceed with a single-use facility in the next fiscal year that was on, I believe that's on the current capital plan, or does there need to be discussion about shifting some priorities to give more time to discuss a possible joint venture? Kind of, I guess, open topic.
And did you have something, Mr. Besson? Anybody else?
Well, after the presentation given with the 5-on-5 and everything, and now with the two finance directors of the two boards or whatever, trying to work together to try to begin some type of process, I mean, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that for us is to go ahead and try to start the beginning stages of a similar program to see if it's feasible for Lee County schools in Lee County, to see not only these capital improvement projects, but also other important criteria to the school system as well. And we do have CIP projects that are on the current budget, that have been on the previous budgets. And I understand that the 5-on-5 is gonna take some time to develop and all that kind of stuff, and so, we don't wanna kick the can down the road, but I would at least like to make the motion to at least engage in starting this program to see the feasibility of how it will work in Lee County.
Could you reinstate your motion?
Yes. With all that being said, I'd like to make a motion to begin the 5-on-5 committees between the county commissioners and the school board to begin further discussion on CIP projects for the school system and other important criteria.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Now, any more discussion?
I guess the only discussion for me on that would be, and Mr. Gasser pointed this out, to ensure that we're not pushing projects down the road again, because we have several projects that have been pushed, the auditorium on this agenda being one of those that has been pushed for many years. And knowing that the bus garage is on for the next fiscal year, so would theoretically start in July, I'm gonna just throw this out there. I assume that a 5-on-5 committee wouldn't convene and get all the things sorted to change that bus garage. So I mean, I would think those projects would need to flip, and I know we've had that discussion with the Board of Commissioners before, and there wasn't interest to do that, but I just really don't want to see these big capital projects get pushed another year down the road. That'd be my only concern.
Any more discussion? I'll quote Eric Davidson, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so I look forward to us looking ahead with that. And I think it's a great idea, the 5 to 5, and I think it would be wonderful we actually had, and I'm certain that we can get it because we got great people in this community, and people wouldn't even run for county commissioner if they didn't care about the community. So I'm certain that we'll be able to get us at least 2 or 3 volunteers that would like to at least try to attempt this. Is any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
So the county manager, a question for you. And we've talked about the joint maintenance facility and storage building on the Jonesboro site. Has the tax assessor, Mr. Brown, given us an assessment of the actual value of that property? Because I understand it was at one level and,
Yes, sir. It's still at the, I think it's $2 million number.
okay.
Right.
That's per acre?
No, that was the
2
total
million
assessed
for the
value.
total?
Excuse me, I would need to find my email.
Because today at the Sanford Area Growth Alliance, Mr. Steve Malloy from Adcock Associates said that there was a parcel of land that went for $102 million an acre off Horner Boulevard. And I wasn't sure exactly where. I didn't get to pin him down to ask where. But I believe he said $1.2 million per acre. Might have been more than that. And if it's in that neighborhood, it's going to be impacting your property in the old Jonesboro school site. So that would be way out of our budgetary constraints. So we're not going to be able to manipulate a joint facility simply because of the cost of the property that we would have to reimburse the school for.
The value is $2,900,000, for the entire parcel is $2,948,100.
And then the acreage would break that down. It's great to have a manager. It used to be the finance director.
That's where I'm trying to find the total number of acres.
So whatever you do, if you sell it, you got some money. If you don't sell it, you can put your school bus garage there.
Well, does anybody else have any questions about the bus garage? So we move on to that one. And then the last thing was,
Ben, do you
we
know
would
how many
like to,
acres it is?
we would like a clear, we would like for the county commissioners to be very clear about their expectations from the school board as far as the reporting, not just by law. We've sat up here and we listened to that class in the beginning. It's got this is what the law says, this is what the law says, this is Lee County. What does Lee County say? What do you really want from the board? What are we missing that you don't feel like that we're transparent on? Would you like it presented a different way? And I think the 5 to 5 would help us meet the same expectations. And I think this question came from one of the board members, because I went with the board to see what they wanted on the agenda. And 3 of them were like, we would really like to know exactly what's expected from the Board of Education as far as providing the budgets and the things that's needed. Because personally, a county commissioner, it just blows my mind. When I'm sitting here watching, the stadiums, oh, wow, we can't have a graduation because the stadium's going to fall in. As a county commissioner, we don't want to have to come back to the county saying, we need this for this, we need this, that. We need to be able to have some more continuity. So I'm thinking, is there something, or the board is requesting that the county, when you guys, and you don't have to tell us tonight, just tell us specifically what you would like from the Board of Education, so it's clear and we don't have to keep going back and forth. Does that make sense? Yes.
If I could build on it a little bit, because this was an item that I was really interested in talking about, specific to the budget. And again, I think the 5-on-5 discussion, if we get to that place, this might not even be needed, but since I don't like to run on assumptions like that we will be in that place by next year. So knowing the last few years since I've been on the school board, I think we came, it was like in May, the first go around that I had, which was like end of the process, so there was no time for meaningful discussion. So we backed it up and came a little bit earlier, and we came a little bit earlier this year, I think it was in March. And then there was discussion about coming at the winter retreat, which ended up being not really a presentation by the school board, but just kind of presenting or providing like a budgetary figure for the commissioners to work off of. So when I'm thinking about what are the expectations, it's like, at what point are we gonna get together and discuss that budget and share with you guys the why behind what we're asking for, and, you know, provide you with any and all needed information to be able to make your decision on where you land with our budget. So that was, you know, in my head, what I meant for by what are the expectations.
Starting with my board, I could ask Commissioner Sharp, with the most experience you've had on the Board of Education, expectations, being on both sides of the fence.
This might hurt coming from me, but professionalism, and that's towards me. And, you know, for everybody. I'm gonna do my best to remain professional. Maybe stop Facebook posts that, about the county that's not accurate, maybe. And provide requested information in a timely manner. I don't think you guys are our problem. I don't think us guys are your problem. I think the legislature is our problem.
Yep.
So, with that being said, that's where I'm at with it.
Commissioner Lovick.
I think that's one of the last points he made. That's one of our biggest problems is people coming to both sides of the boards, and I guess we feel like we get thrown darts at. And there again, if the state would do their part in their budgets and stuff and get, you know, salaries out in a timely manner, I think that would solve a lot of our problems. That's all I got. Thank you.
Commissioner Martin.
Look, I'm going to be the least political person in the room right now, and I'm going to say it's okay because I'm also the newest person in the room, along with some of our Board of Education members over there. But what I've seen in the short time that I've been here is there's frustration on both sides of the board, and there's very little collaboration, right? And so, you know, we have these big issues, these capital projects, and we have the pay, right, the pay issue. Once if we could pull those out, which I know we can't, right, but if we could pull those out and at least get a baseline for what we're doing, I think that would be helpful. I briefly looked at some information today that was just sent on your budget, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to sit down with Alan and really understand what this is, right? So yes, I agree, the 5-on-5s hopefully will help create a platform for conversation, but the bottom line is it really is going to be, like the gentleman from Dare County said, it has to be for Lee County that the school is willing to maneuver some things around and make adaptations for big projects, and the county is willing to really consider the needs of the school and find that place, right? I know there's all this, I'm talking a lot, and I'm going to put myself out on a limb, which is probably going to get me shot down on Facebook later, not by you guys, but just by the general public.
Can I give you some advice?
No, I'm going to say it. You know, the auditorium issue, right? Like, as a Lee County citizen of the auditorium, I know it's a deep passion for the school, but from a fiscal perspective, and I know it's already on the plan, but it's like, can we find ways to work things out together so that we don't have to put these enormous amounts of money in things that we maybe we don't need it? Like, could we figure out a way to get the kids to another auditorium? I don't know. But these are the types of miscommunications that the two boards are always having. We hear the request, or let me speak for me. I hear the request and I think, do we really need to spend all that taxpayer money on that? You're saying yes. I'm wondering, that's where we need the conversations. I'm done now.
If I could add to the auditorium, and Dr. Dozenbach, correct me if I'm wrong, but, and it was clarified with me, and I'm thinking at one of our breakfasts or our discussions, not only are we building an auditorium and 4 or 6 classrooms, I forget the number, but we're also freeing up space that's currently being used by the arts and music students that would be transitioned to classrooms that are now being occupied by the arts and theater groups. So it's going to be an expansion
I
of the
understand.
school, providing them, the ability to expand, short of building a new school is what it is. So I'm correct in that?
Yes, sir, you are correct. You know, an example, at Southern Lee High School, the current class that holds our band and orchestra is quite a large room. It would make more sense for them to be in an auditorium and have a better facility, but that large room could likely be turned into 2 classrooms with the help of our maintenance department, allowing us to get rid of the mobile units or shift those to another school, probably an elementary school, where we're seeing a lot of growth. And as years progress, we're going to start to see that growth at the high school level, and turning some of these larger classrooms that would move into the auditorium into multiple spaces would allow us to do that within the building.
Right, and these are the types of conversations that I'm referring to, right? Like, these are the types of conversations where we all need to know what that thought is and not just see a number on a line and not understand it.
And I know we discussed this before she was elected, so she never got those notes. I apologize. Commissioner Lovick. I'm sorry, Commissioner Vorbeck.
Hey, how you doing?
Wow.
It's been a long day. The dog rallied me at about 2:30 this morning. He had to go out because something out there was, so I'm lacking sleep. I apologize.
I think you guys brought up a really good point on going back to the Dare County thing. Some of these conversations, I think and I guess speak for myself, when I ask questions, it's not dictating that you guys have a lesser knowledge of something or that I think you're stupid or anything along those lines. I'm trying to fully understand it the same way you guys like to ask questions about things and feel comfortable voting on. So I think there's this tension that if we ask questions or we even question or we don't necessarily think what you're presenting or is something that we 100% agree with, that it's automatically, it's a judgment on your character or a judgment on how, what you're capable of doing. You guys have meetings for long hours that we're not privy to. We have meetings and then we have discussions amongst ourselves as well that you guys aren't privy to. So I think it's reminding everyone that when you come to the table, realize that you may be starting from section C of your conversation, but we're just being brought in on A. And so I think having just that little bit of a grace to give us that, to try and, when you're communicating things, and it's a line item that we don't fully understand because we're not fully in it, the same way you guys aren't fully in our commissioner budgets and what we're dealing with. So I think you guys have brought up both great examples on why a 5-on-5 or any type of conversation on some of these topics would be better. That's it.
That's it?
I do want to thank the county commissioners for at least listening to the DARE. You notice on the agenda, we did not add what were our expectations of the county commissioners, because I know what the expectation of the community is, and that their expectation is that both boards work together and come together to do the best for the community. We're either working together or we're not, and I look forward to the fact that we are going to work together. And I'm very hopeful with this 5-to-5 plan that we can sit down and actually have some conversations and not the back and back and stuff. I look forward to it. That's all I have.
Any further questions, discussions?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adjourn.
I'm going to make it. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by the Board of Commissioners to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
All in favor?
Lee County Board of Commissioners adjourned.